Welcome to today's Mishna Yomi. Today we will, Emir Hashem, be learning Perek Dalid, Mishnayos Gimel through Dalid, chapter 4, the 3rd through 4th Mishnayos. So Mishnah Gimel. Just remember again, in yesterday's Mishnah Yomi, we discussed the Ma'amados, which were the cohorts of Yisraelim, who part of them accompanied the Kohanim and the Leviim up in the Beis HaMikdash, and the remaining part of the group would gather in their local cities. Now, we discussed that what would they do in their local cities. So the last Mishnah says they would read Parshas Bereshis. So here the Mishnah goes into a little bit greater depth. Va'anshe ma'amad hayu misanin arba'a yomim b'shavua. The Yisraelim, who were part of the ma'amad, part of the cohort who stayed behind in the local cities, they would fast during the 4 days that they were on call. Obviously not consecutive. They would eat at night, but they would go ahead and they would fast. Miyom shini yom chamishi, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. V'lo hayu misanin erev Shabbos. However, they would not fast on erev Shabbos. Why? Because it's not covered, it's not proper honor to go into Shabbos ravenous. Therefore, they wouldn't fast on erev Shabbos. Nor would they fast on Sunday. In order, literally translated, that we not leave the tranquility and enjoyment of Shabbos and go into the difficulty and strain of a fast day and die. So the Yerushalmi points out that dying is not literal over here. The idea being that the contrast may just make a person ill. So in order not to go from the enjoyment of Shabbos to the strain of a fast day, they don't fast on Sunday. And obviously it goes without saying they don't fast on Shabbos as well. So Friday, Shabbos, Sunday they did not fast, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday they would fast. The Mishnah says, remember in the previous Mishnah we learned that they would read from the section of Bereshis. So how would they divide it up? Yom Arishon, Bereshis v'hirakia. So on the first day of the Ma'amad, they would read from Bereshis, the beginning of Bereshis, up until the section or the pasuk of Yehirakia, let there be a sky. First 8 psukim. Basheni, on the second day, they would read Yehirakia v'kavosh shemaim, let there be a sky, until ultimately let the waters gather. So that's psukim Vav, 6 through Yud Gimel through 13. Bashlishi, on the third day, Yikavu hamayim v'hima oros, they would read from the section where HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded the waters to gather in one place, revealing the land up until the creation of the luminaries, and that's pasuk 9 tes through 19 through Yutes. Berevi, on the fourth day, Yehima Oros v'Yishrutzu Amayim, they would read the section of the creation of the luminaries up until the creation of the water creatures. That's pasuk Yedalid until pasuk Chav Gimel 14 through 23. Bechamishi, on the fifth day, Yishrutzu Amayim v'Totzei Haaretz, they would read the section of let the water create or be created in the water creatures until ultimately again the land produces. So that's from pasuk Chaf until Lamed Aleph 20 until 31. Bashishi Totzia Aretz Ad Vaychulu Hashamayim, and on the sixth day, right, I should say on Friday, they would go ahead and they would read, let the earth bring forth vegetation up until the conclusion of the creative process, which is Perek Beis, it's from chapter, they would read, Totzia Aretz, which is Psukim, which is Chav Dalid until Lamed Aleph, and then Vaychulu Hashamayim, which is the beginning of the second chapter. So this is how they would break up the entire story of Bereshis, the entire Genesis narrative throughout the 6 days of the Ma'amad. Parsha Gidola, a large parsha, which is comprised of more than 3 psukim, Koronoso b'shnayim, they would divide up that reading amongst 2 people. Kitana, a small parsha, which was only 3 psukim, they would only have b'yachid, an individual would go ahead and read it. B'shachris uba mosaf, and ultimately, when would they do this? They would read out of a Sefer Torah, both by Shachris and by Musaf. So interestingly enough, they would go out and they would read the section of Bereshis, both by Shachris and by Musaf. However, by Mincha time, Nichnasin v'korin apien kikorin eshma. Interestingly enough, by Mincha time, they would also read it again, but this time they would not read it from a scroll. Instead, they wouldn't read it from a scroll. Instead, they would just go ahead and read it as one reads Kriyas Shema. In other words, by heart. Erev Shabbos by Mincha lo hayu nichnasin. Erev Shabbos, by Mincha time, they would not gather in the shuls again for the Ma'amad, mipnei kavod Shabbos, because since people need time to prepare for Shabbos, they would not go ahead and gather. They would not gather Friday afternoon for the Ma'amados. Incredible. This brings us now to Mishnah Dalid. So the Mishnah says, Kol yom sheyesh bo halal, ein bo ma'amad b'shachris. any day in which you recite Hallel. So, any day that you recite Hallel, but for example, doesn't have a carbon musaf. A good example of this would be Chanukah. Right? Chanukah is a day where you recite Hallel, but there is no musaf offering on Chanukah. So any day like that, Ein bo ma'amad b'shachris. Ultimately, again, they would not gather, the ma'amad, of Yisraelim would not gather in the shul in the morning. They would not go, because remember again, if it's a day that has Hallel, so the truth is they would not gather to recite supplications, nor would they gather to read from Bereshis, because Hallel sets aside all of that. Karban Musaf, on a day where there's a Karban Musaf, so for example, again, Rosh Chodesh is a good example of this. There's a Karban Musaf on Rosh Chodesh, in addition to Hallel. What's the halacha? Ein bo Ne'ilah. They would not daven the supplemental prayer of Ne'ilah, as we spoke about again in the previous Mishnayos. You see a theme over here. The theme is that whenever there is an element of Yom Tiv on a particular day, so we don't go ahead and we kind of set aside the ma'amad practices for that particular day. Karban Eitzim, any day in which there's Karban Eitzim. Now, Karban Eitzim is very interesting. Literally means offering of wood. But what it actually was as follows. Throughout the time of the Beis HaMikdash, there were families who pledged wood to the Beis HaMikdash on the day in which you were fulfilling your wood pledge. So they would go ahead and bring a karban, an olas nedava, right? A voluntary offering. That offering was called a karban eitzim, literally a karban of wood. Obviously, karban itself wasn't wood. The karban itself was an olah, but it was called the karban of wood. And that day was a Yom Tiv. So a day in which karban eitzim is brought, ein bo mincha. We do not gather for the ma'amados for tfilas mincha. So again, remember, the way the ma'amados are set up is we have gatherings by Shachris, Mincha, and Ne'ilah. So what it's saying is whenever there's a Yom Tov aspect, some element of the ma'amad is suspended. So if it's a day where there's Karban Eitzim, we won't have the ma'amad by mincha. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Amar Ben Azai. Ben Azai said, one second. Ben Azai says, Kach haya Rabbi Yoshua shona, karban musaf, any day where there's a karban musaf, ein bo mincha. We do not gather for the ma'amad during mincha itself. During mincha itself. Karban eitzim, any day where there's a karban eitzim, ultimately ein bo ne'ilah. We won't go ahead and have ne'ilah that day. So again, Ben Azai quoting over here that Rabbi Yoshua had a little bit of a different version than Rabbi Akiva, and the Mishna ends off by saying, Chazir Rabbi Akiva, lios shona keben Azai. And ultimately, again, Rabbi Akiva retracted his original position and paskined like Ben Azai, namely, that any day when there is a karban musaf, we don't have the ma'amad gathering by mincha, but we'll have it by ne'ilah. Any day that there's karban eitzim, we won't have a ma'amad gathering by ne'ilah, but we will have one by musaf. This concludes our Mishna Yomi section for today. Wishing everyone a wonderful day. And the Meretz Hashem tomorrow, we will continue with Mishnayos Hey and Vav. Have a great day.